Okay. I don't know what is going on today, but today is cursed. That's all I've got. Between storms blowing down fences and random Discord bot problems and OBS crashing on me. Some days you just have to make the proper sacrifice to the technical gods to be able to do what you want to do. It's just how it works. So, let's just try this again. Happy Thursday. I'm glad you're here. We're going to continue with our Amazon Web Services exploration into the Cloud Practitioner Exam and just getting into the last parts of the domain that we've been covering. So just to give you some review, music seems kind of loud for me today. Let me turn that down. It's jazzy. I'll take it, but it's loud. Okay. Better. All right, so we're in domain 3, and really we've just been learning all about the core AWS services. So we've covered compute, which was Elastic Beanstalk and Lambda, and EC2. We covered our content and network delivery services, so virtual private cloud, direct connect, Route 53, load balancing, CloudFront, API gateway. Last time we talked about file storage services, so S3, different types of storage, Glacier, Deep Archive, Elastic Block Store, file system, Snowball and Snowmobile. Looks like I have some markup problems. Anyway, we're gonna continue with what we've been doing in this domain, but I did appreciate the feedback that I got on the previous video where I had mentioned, and I'd said, hey, you can host a static website on S3 and use those buckets to do that, and I didn't know if that was a useful thing. So I appreciated the feedback that you thought that was useful. So that's actually where I want to start today, was we had talked about Amazon S3 and this idea of buckets and object storage and things like that. And so where I wanted to start today was, all right, if I want to use S3 for my object storage as a website, like static website hosting, then how do I do that? Now, a static website, just so you're clear, can contain client-side scripting, so things like JavaScript. It cannot do any server-side processing because there's no actual web server here. We're just using file storage that has like a publicly available endpoint. So no PHP, no JSP, no ASP.NET, nothing like that. Nothing that requires a server on the back end. So let's check out, how does this work? So you can see I'm already logged into the console, and here I am in Amazon S3. And so we're going to start with creating a bucket. So we're going to give our bucket a name, and it has to be, like you can see here in the box, it has to be a DNS compliant bucket name. So I'm just going to name this sample site, like that. We talked about regions. You can choose which region. You can copy settings from existing buckets if you have one. If you don't, that's fine. Ooh, I already have one. Name this. Sample site CP for Cloud Practitioner. Okay. So when we are setting up our bucket, you get a lot of different options, right? We've talked about, we can do versions of an object, we can log requests, we can do tags, we can do all these things. You want to set up CloudWatch, right? You can do those things. You can allow objects in this bucket to be locked so they can't be moved or modified. We don't need any of this for hosting a website, but it's cool nonetheless. We don't want to block public access because this is gonna host a website. I like the big warning box. And so you can, did I skip the checkbox? There's actually a place. Oh, for log delivery. They keep changing this window on me too, which I think is kind of irritating, but. All right, we create our bucket. And here it is. It gives us, level of access. And so we can come up here into the properties, and then here you can see static website hosting. We're gonna enable this. Use this bucket to host a website. What is our index document? I named mine index.html. If you have an error document, any redirect rules. All right, we're gonna save that. Now you have to have an HTML file to test this out. So I just made, let me open this so you can see, from a template that I have, just a basic HTML website. What does it look like? It looks like this. It's not anything fancy. All right, so we're gonna upload our index document, and you have to specify like what is the default file that should be served from this bucket. If you don't name it index.html, you can name it something else. Again, if you have your own custom error document for HTML-based errors, you can supply that. Those advanced redirection rules, if you want to route requests according to a specific object key name or prefix, you can set that up in that static web hosting box there. We don't mess really with anything else. We don't do anything else. So now we can upload. Yeah, we actually probably want to check. Yeah, that's off. Okay. And then we need to add a bucket policy. I don't want to skip this step. So adding a bucket policy here allows you to grant public read access to our bucket, because otherwise people, when they try to access our pages, it's not going to serve the page correctly, and they're not going to get access. So if you want to give full access to your bucket, I have it over here in a notepad, but these are written in JSON, and you can use this policy generator link. You can't see that because I'm in the way. This right there. You can use the policy generator to create these JSONs if you don't already have them. But we have public, you can't read that. Public read get object, allow all of this object. Right, so that's what that looks like. And then resource, this is our bucket name. Sample site CP, not the .com. Sample site CP is our bucket name, and now we can save. Like, we highly recommend you never grant any kind of public access to your bucket. But you can. You totally can. All right, let's go upload. Drop my file. There it is. Gotta grant your public read access. And then remember when we talked about the different types of storage with S3, this is where you get to choose. We're just gonna use standard. All right, upload. there it is. So once you've configured your bucket as a static website, set permissions, uploaded a file, we can access it through an S3 website endpoint. So we should be able to set one up now. Actually, I think they've changed this. You used to be able to do bucket name, so sample site cp dot s3 hyphen website hyphen region. We put this what's global? That's annoying. I don't think that's right, but it's usually something like that. Yeah, I just have the region wrong. There we go. Name of the bucket, sample site CP, because yeah, you don't have to do this anymore. You don't have to actually set up this access point to serve the site. So it's name of the bucket dot S3 hyphen website hyphen region, which is US East 1 for this particular example, .amazonaws.com. And there's our page. Fun, huh? So if you just needed, like, again, has to be static, but if you just needed, you know, quick and dirty website with a couple of static files, you upload your images, you can create folders, you can see that in here. And then serve it through, like, you don't own a domain, but you can just serve the site through there. That's how it works. So I'm glad that you provided me with the feedback that was useful information, because sometimes I don't know if that's interesting or not. So hopefully that made sense, but cool. All right, so we are working on our document that we've been working on, and we are currently getting started in our database services section, and we have the database services, and then we have app integration services, and then we're gonna be finished with this section. So I hope you're excited. That means we're so much closer to the end. Let me get my notes here. Where am I at? Okay. Database services. There's a couple of different ones that we're going to talk about. You can see the whole list of database services in our console. The primary ones we're going to talk about are Relational Database Service, also known as RDS, DynamoDB, and then Elasticache and Redshift. There are more, Neptune and Keyspaces and some of these others, but when we talk about core services, these are the ones that we're really working on. All right, so I actually also want to include Aurora. So I think we'll talk about Aurora too, because that's important. So going back to what we talked about as our cloud computing model, in the previous videos. We talked about this idea of infrastructure as a service. And this approach gives us kind of the maximum control. And remember, there was that scale. So we had the options on the left, like, right, that's more control. Options on the right gave us like less control, but also like minimum maintenance. So with databases on AWS, you would take like an EC2 server and you could deploy your database onto it because it's a server and you can just install what you want. But if you're like a DevOps engineer and you want to have complete control over the OS that your database is running on, then that's perfect, because then you get full control of that machine. You can install whatever you want. You can do whatever you want as far as like monitoring. All right. And then you just utilize that like EC2 instance directly. Maybe you want to have control over your database, but you don't need control over the underlying infrastructure, or you just don't have the knowledge to understand that underlying infrastructure, but you still want to leverage a relational database service. And that's really what RDS is all about. So in this section, we're talking about these types of database services that we don't have to think about the hardware, we don't have to think about servers, we don't have to think about operating systems. These are just databases that then give us like different capabilities and different services that we can use within our applications. So let's start with the relational database service, and I've been linking in our documentation here. To the page that explains what it is. But Amazon's relational database service is, basically just databases in the cloud. So easy to set up and operate databases in the cloud. Doesn't require you to have a server or understand the underlying infrastructure, right? We don't have to do any of that. And this is, it was what we call a fully managed service. So it handles provisioning. So going out and like actually obtaining server space, obtaining storage, licensing, patching, backups, recovery. These are all the things that if you had to do it yourself, it would probably take a fair amount of time to implement and then to handle it and to scale. And then if you needed to, if you needed to automate it, to integrate it in, right? So you get this all by default by leveraging the RDS service. It does support operations across multiple availability zones. So you can have deployments across those multiple availability zones so that you can have read replicas, which creates a greater amount of scale. Right? And then that scaling, of course, allows you to be more efficient within the applications that are leveraging the database. And that's kind of important to note. So when you launch an instance, it launches into your virtual private cloud that we talked about. And then you have those different volumes of elastic block storage. So with the relational database service, we have 2 different volume types that are available to us, and then we can access those. So 2 types of storage. So general purpose SSDs and those provisioned IOPS drives that we talked about from the elastic block storage. And then you have access to a lot of different database platforms. Let's see, there's a list. Yeah. So right now it says Amazon's Aurora, which is actually Amazon's database platform, if you're not familiar with that. Potato SQL, PostgreSQL. I always call it Potato SQL. MySQL, MariaDB, Oracle, and Microsoft. So you get access to all of these different platforms. If you, like I use it in an educational environment. So if I have a project that students are working on and they need MySQL, I can bring up a MySQL instance. If they are taking a certification exam for Microsoft SQL and I want them to have you know, a database of that to work with to prepare, I can create an instance of that. So you get all of these different platforms available to you without having to worry about, do I have the proper hardware? Do I have all the licensing? How do I get those installations, right? Just kind of like with our EC2 instances where we saw that we could go in and choose various types of images to get access to different operating systems. When you go in to create a database, you get to choose which platform you want, and then you can start setting up all of your settings and what kind of instance sizes and things that you need and get that configured. A couple of different wizards available, easy create, stuff like that. But overall, very, very easy to use. And then, you know, once you have that kind of database that's running within your own data center, you know, or at your home data center, you know, you can migrate things into your Amazon data center. So you can do like one-time migration, or you can do like continual migration. And it just supports all of that kind of out of the box. So commercial and open source databases. And then of course, pricing wise, you only pay for that computing time based on the type of database that you're using. And it'll tell you, like, if I came in here and said, oh, I want an Aurora database, like which version do I need? And then Aurora supports MySQL and PostgreSQL. So you can choose, and then is this regional or global? They have different features according to different databases, and I know we didn't talk about Aurora really, but this is kind of an example of some of the features Aurora has. We could say, okay, well, it's a test environment, settings. You can set up your master passwords and what kind of instance size. Again, this is those EC2 instances. So depending on how you want to set your database up, what kind of instance size do you want to set up? So any additional configuration and things, you know, you can set all that up. And then it's easy. And then you just click create database down here at the end. If you have a different kind, like right now, I have Microsoft SQL Server that's running. You get to choose your different types. So do you want Express or Web or Standard? What version? Now there is some free tier opportunity in RDS. We talked about the free tier and how you can kind of try to stay within the limits of that free tier. So if you want to make sure that you're in that free tier, then you can choose that, and it'll kind of give you the templates that you need to make sure that you're not going to go outside. And then, yeah, usually down here you have the estimated monthly costs. So you can see monthly how much the database with this configuration is going to run you. And this is less than 20 bucks a month in this like small configuration. Usually the databases I run, I just use a small instance of SQL Server Express, and just depends on how much storage you're using. As students fill up their databases, then I might get up to $30 a month. But that's extremely cheap, right? I don't know if you've ever priced out what a on-prem database costs, but you have to buy a server. And so you can be quite expensive to have to set that up. So let me make a special note in here about Amazon Aurora. So this is Amazon's database engine available through RDS. Very, very cost effective. So if you're not maybe leaning towards a particular platform, you're not tied to MySQL or PostgreSQL or something like that, and you're open to trying new things, you can check out Amazon's database engine Aurora, which is both MySQL and PostgreSQL compatible. They say it's a relational database built for the cloud, performance and availability of commercial grade databases at 1/10 the cost, which can be huge, right? So you saw my my MS SQL server was running me 20 bucks a month, so 1/10 of the cost. I could be running an Aurora server for like $2 a month. Yeah, probably. It just depends on what features and things you need. So you can read about Aurora. Let me get some documentation in here. I think I'd be good at markup by now. They say it's, there's some stats on here about it being 5 times faster than standard MySQL, 3 times faster than standard Postgre. Security, availability, reliability, right? 1/10 of the cost. So some other particulars in there, really depending on the kind of database setup that you need. Auto scales up to 64 terabytes per database instance. That's a big old database. 15 low latency read replicas, point in time recovery, continuous backups, things like that. And you can set up a lot of this in RDS. You can come in here and set up, regular, they call them snapshots. You can do them manually. You can also have the system do them on a regular basis. You can store them in S3 buckets if you wanted to be able to access those in a different way. But yeah, again, this is all things that are handled by the relational database service so that you don't have to. All right, so let's talk about Dynamo. DynamoDB is just fun to say. Pull up the page here. So, DynamoDB is honestly a pretty interesting service. And again, it's fully managed like RDS, but it's a NoSQL service. If you're not familiar with the idea of a NoSQL service, this is really that software as a service kind of option, you know, based on that scale that we talked about earlier. You simply use the database. There's not a relational component when we have this NoSQL kind of approach. So that gives you some flexibility in terms of that schema, but also provides some limitations depending on how you build your applications. It provides key values and document database. It does enable an extremely low latency at just about any scale. You know, the documentation says that it delivers single-digit millisecond performance at any scale. Like, think about that for a second. Like, single-digit millisecond, go out, fetch, return at any scale. So it doesn't matter how many users you load up into this or how many files you store. So, you know, just like with RDS, you know, we say it's fully managed. It's multi-region, multi-master, durable, built-in security, backups, restore, in-memory caching. So a lot of features. And they talk about, you know, some of the big businesses that have apps that really require that, again, that single-digit millisecond performance. Lyft, Airbnb, Capital One, Samsung use this kind of setup. So depending on your application or the type of database structure that you need to use, then, you know, you're either in that relational database place where you need to choose like what relational database platform you want to use, or maybe you can look at a NoSQL option and go for something like DynamoDB. Other features, let's see, what else do I have here? That in-memory cache can handle more than 1 trillion requests per day, can support peaks of more than 20 million requests per second. Right? That's scale that you just can't get with any other database provider. And it's managed and it's set up here in a way that makes it so you don't have to manage any of that underlying infrastructure. And you can scale it without like excessive maintenance, which is sometimes really critical, because if you've ever tried to scale a database in the cloud, it can be really challenging. You run into a lot of issues, and so scaling might be, you know, one of those big pain points for you, and if that's the case, then DynamoDB is a great choice. So I think we're ready to, I think that's it. I think we're gonna move on to Elasticache. Get their website here. Elasticache is also a fun word to say. I don't know who AWS has naming their stuff, but they're pretty brilliant, especially when you compare it to the fact that Microsoft can't manage to name anything appropriately, ever. So someone is really killing it. over there at Amazon. All right, so we have two other managed services that you can leverage on AWS that we're going to talk about. So let's go for Elasticache documentation and Redshift. So Elasticache is a fully managed in-memory data store. And it actually has two different engines. Let me see. I thought they had a comparison. So Redis and Memcached are the two different engines. They had used to have a cute little comparison. Well, now it's a table. So you can get in here and dig around between Redis and Memcache, like it says, in-memory data stores, easy to use, high performance, designed, you know, Memcache is designed for simplicity. Redis has a bunch of features. They give you a table here of kind of what they can all do and helps you decide, you know, which one should you use or which one is better than the other, whichever. Those are really, I mean, and Redis and Memcache, if you're shopping around for data stores, are really, you know, the only two. So, they both are going to supply, you know, low latency in terms of response time. You can have the scaling and read replication and things to meet your application demand. Again, you don't have to manage any underlying infrastructure. I think I just keep saying that, but that's the way it works. And they both handle, you know, what our common use case would be. So things like database layer caching. So even if you're working with another database, or even something like DynamoDB, you probably want to add a cache layer between your application and the database. So Elasticache can help you fill that need. And even for things like session storage. So if you're working with a web application that's doing session storage, you can utilize Elasticache with something like Redis to get those quick responses on session data. So that's really the whole gig. You know, open source compatible in-memory data stores in the cloud. They give you a couple of other case studies in here that have to do with gaming, geospatial services, real-time analytics, queuing. Yeah, so if you're not really certain about how these kinds of services work, you know, go read through the documentation. They have a cute video that's like an hour long. So you can go read about how that works, right? And the differences between the two. All right, so let's talk about Redshift. Get the page. Paste, thanks. Okay, so Redshift is a data warehouse. And so if you have the need for a scalable data warehouse service, then this is what Amazon provides. So this is petabytes in scale, leverages high performance disks, and gives you the ability to have kind of that high availability traditional, versus traditional data warehousing, because it's designed with that cloud solution in mind. So it gives you the ability to fully encrypt the contents of your data warehouse, and gives you a level of isolation within your virtual private cloud. And so again, they give you like some different kind of case studies, Fortune 500 companies, startups, again, things like Lyft, that use this service. So you can actually query this data. So you can query these petabytes. Why did I capitalize this? This was weird. Of structured and semi-structured data across your data warehouse. Just using standard SQL, which is really helpful. You can save the results of your query back to S3. You can use open formats like Apache Parquet. You can use other analytics services. Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons why this is a pretty good feature. Depending on what you're doing, you may have never had the opportunity or need to even look at a data warehouse service. So again, if you're not familiar with how these work, you can go check out the documentation. And then app integration. Let's get that. That's the next one we're going to talk about. Back up. Okay. What do I have? Okay, so app integration on the app integration services is really a suite of services that enable communications between decoupled components within microservices, distributed systems, and serverless applications. And we've talked about some of those and how different AWS services kind of work with, things like containers or serverless applications. Decoupling applications at any scale can reduce kind of the impact of changes, which makes it easier to update and faster to release new features. And so using these application integration services to connect your apps means that you no longer have to write custom code to enable interoperability between applications. I guess that's really what interoperability means, but it limits extra code that may be repeated in your microservices and allows you to really focus on shifting your operational responsibilities to AWS, so you can really focus on that development and innovation part. It has automatic scaling, so that's the provisioning, patching, managing servers. If one service has a failure or a spike in workload, it won't affect your other services. So again, separating out those responsibilities. And then application integration messaging services allows you to accommodate really any level of throughput and use those cross availability zone messages to provide that high availability and high durability. So there's a lot of different types of services. If we get in here, you can see messaging, workflows, API management. So you can go read about all of these different services that are available kind of under this umbrella of app integration services. So yeah, I had this in here. Messaging is probably one of the biggest ones. So messaging allows you to publish and subscribe. Oh, my earbud is like killing me today. It keeps getting tangled in my hair. First world problems. Publish and subscribe to messaging for high throughput and reliable message delivery. Hey Tristan, is this for a specific class or just general education? So really what I'm focusing right now is all about the Certified Cloud Practitioner Exam, which if you're not familiar with kind of cloud computing or at least Amazon's take on it, I'm working through all of the domains and objectives. I'm kind of like, what are all the things that you would need to know or learn to become a certified cloud practitioner with Amazon? And then that kind of gives you that foundation level certification to then move up into some of those other different types of certifications that are available. So using the Cloud Practitioner Guide, and here let me commit this so that I can send you the link. Putting these resources out here so that you can kind of follow along as I make these pages. Some of this, if you've worked with AWS before, might be review. If you've never worked with AWS before, then all of this is new and there's lots of good things to learn. And so while I do have a cloud computing class that teaches you a little more in depth on how to use these services, this in particular is just for anyone who wants to learn about cloud computing and kind of take that next step towards certification, which just kind of gets you in that learning mode so that you can then move on to, doing some of this professionally. Cloud computing services is really the future of software development. Writing these kinds of, microservices and things that we're talking about, especially in this section, where you're writing things in containers, microservices, the serverless applications, those case studies that I talked about, companies like Lyft that are, really leveraging and have to leverage those, millisecond turnaround times for database storage. So yeah, I'm glad that you have stopped by and are joining the session. This is session 5, I think. Honestly, I'd have to go look. I keep them all on Twitch in my collections. So there's an Amazon section on my Twitch videos page. I also have them on YouTube. So you can, go through each one and kind of check out the different sessions and what we've covered. And so by the time I'm done with this particular kind of, I guess you could call it a course that I'm putting together, having studied and reviewed, created your own account, got in the console, played with things, you should be ready for the Cloud Practitioner Exam. And so that's my goal, is to really just help people see, what do they need to learn, what's on the exam, and kind of, think about cloud computing. So yeah, thanks for coming by. So yeah, AWS messaging, the Amazon, they call it the Amazon, of course they do, Simple Notification Service, or SNS. And yeah, you can have a message queue that sends, it's typing, stores and receives messages between applications. And you can have a message broker. Well, let's, yeah, hold on, let's back that up. We have Amazon MQ, which is our message broker. So this makes migration easy and enables those hybrid architectures that we talked about previously. Yeah. So that's yeah, the simple notification service and simple queue service. SQS. So pretty cool stuff. And I mentioned just this one because that's probably the one that most people leverage. Although I would also say that API management, the API gateway, is also an important one. But I think we talked about API gateway a little bit earlier. But yeah, that's a big one. I put step functions on here, but honestly, step functions isn't part of the domain knowledge for the exam anymore. So we're gonna take that out. And we're gonna do our scenario questions for this part. So let's come down here. So this is database services scenarios. And I also had hold on. So I keep my, I keep my notes in like different places. I think I actually had, because my scenarios aren't in this document. Hold on, let me find them. Just a second. I will find them. In here. Yes. Yes, there they are. See, I got it, it's fine. All right, so we have Business A. They are a financial services company who is transitioning their data warehouse to AWS for analysis. This data warehouse would need to support up to 2 petabytes of data. What service would you recommend? There's our question. I was putting these on like a separate line, so let's just continue with that. All right, so we really only have one data warehouse product, and that's Redshift that we talked about. So that's kind of easy in that like there's no other data warehouse product to kind of recommend. That's an easy one. All right, so let's talk about Business B. They have, they are a tech company that needs to launch a MySQL database for a new web application. They need to have direct access to the virtual server that MySQL is running on. So what approach would you recommend? All right, this is a tricky question because immediately we think about like the relational database service and launching a MySQL database on RDS, which is a great answer, except for that caveat that they need to have direct access to the virtual server. So remember, under RDS, those are, where we don't have to think about that infrastructure. We load up the database and we get access to the database, but we do not get any direct access to the server that database lives on. So the answer here is to create an EC2 server with MySQL installed, so that they can have access to that server and to the MySQL instance. And so that's the answer. I know that kind of seems tricky. So we got to pay attention to our little caveats in there. And then business C, they are a gaming company that is trying to determine how to store real-time user analytics. They need low latency and the ability to scale up to 1 million players because they're super optimistic. The company wants to minimize the amount of time it takes to maintain the database. So, what approach would you recommend? And so, while there are commercial database services that you can host on RDS that will scale up to what they need for 1 million players, if we want to minimize the amount of time it takes to maintain the database, and we want to make sure that we really have that low latency, then we're going to recommend DynamoDB, right? That NoSQL service that is really low latency and is going to allow for basically the best latency. That sounds weird when I say it that way. I was actually looking to see, I took step functions out, thinking that it wasn't on the exam anymore. But now I'm second guessing this document. Let's just go back and put it in. Can't hurt. You'll end up knowing a little more than you needed to know for the exam, maybe. So let me pull up the page. All right, so AWS step functions lets you coordinate multiple AWS services into kind of a serverless workflow. So what that means is you can take, and I know we haven't talked about all these, so you may not be familiar, but services like Lambda and Fargate and SageMaker, and kind of stitch them together into an application. So from the user's point of view, it feels like one application, but you're using a bunch of different functions to access different AWS services and kind of stitch them all together. So this kind of makes it simpler. And more intuitive to stitch together different Amazon services. It translates your functions into like a state machine diagram, which is honestly pretty cool. Yeah, here in the documentation. So you build it using like a visual workflow, and you define the workflow as a set of steps, and then you can connect stuff to code, and then you can run it, and you can like swap out tasks over time. And they've got some use cases, you know, if you've got a monolith and you want to carve it into tiny microservices, or you're processing data, you want to automate tasks. A lot of different ways that you could use the step functions. A couple of other things, you know, so we said that it basically enables that orchestration of workflows through your managed service. Supports serverless architectures. That's what we're all about. We don't want to have to know about our infrastructure or our architecture. Supports complex workflows and error handling. And then charge-wise, pricing-wise, you're charged per state transition along with the other services you're using. And it's actually defined the Amazon states language for defining those workflows, which looks a lot like JSON. If you've ever, like when earlier I was doing that S3 stuff and I set those permissions on that bucket and it looked like JSON, that Amazon states language is basically JSON. And that's what it does. All right, so let's go do our scenario review questions for our app integration section. I cannot spell. Scenarios. Help me. I started out this stream talking about how frustrating my day has been, and like just trying to type is just like, I'm gonna pull my hair out. I don't know what's wrong today. It's like a full moon. Okay. Business A. A nonprofit that assigns volunteers to opportunities. Recently, their database server went down and users were unable to sign up. While the situation is now corrected, while the situation is now corrected, there is still some downtime expected in the future. No, I started off with a rant about that storm that came through. It blew down part of my privacy fence. It snapped a pole. I'm gonna have to spend all this money to fix it. I'm so mad. That was how my day started. So it's like already downhill. I'm really glad I got to stream though. I thought I was gonna be messing with stuff all afternoon. And I'm really trying to get in at least once a week on this, or I'm never gonna get it done. And my goal, you know, when I first started this was, to really get this out there so that people could work on it over the summer if that was something, especially if you're students, kind of gives you some time to work on things. My personal goal, because after this I'm going to start working on the same thing for a more professional certification, is to then have that certification by the end of the year. So I've got kind of a path I'm trying to work on, but So anyway, we're a business, we're a nonprofit. We know we're going to have some downtime in the future. The business wants to explore an AWS service that would prevent lost user signups. So basically like no downtime, which in this day and age with cloud computing and everything we can leverage, there should never be downtime. You're doing something wrong. So what service would you recommend? All right. I'm trying to be consistent with my formatting here. And so I know we didn't really dig into this too hard, but if we go back up to, let's see, in this AWS messaging section here, that simple queue service is really, that's kind of the purpose here of the simple queue service. So that's the SQS. So the simple queue service means that we would be allowed to send messages and they would hang out in the queue knowing that they're not being processed because the database server is unavailable. So that service, that simple queue service, would sit there in the middle, receiving messages, from the website or from the app, and then processing them to the database. If the database doesn't respond, based on how you have your scenarios set up, they're going to sit there and wait. And then when the database is back up, it will start processing the queue. So that simple queue service would be perfect for this kind of scenario. We don't have to completely revamp their database and try to get them more uptime if that's, out of their reach or whatever for the current time frame. When we have a service that would just kind of allow that to happen. Oh, I'm sorry to hear about your peas. That's terrible. I don't try to do any gardening. I think I probably just kill it or forget about it. I think that's it. I get too busy and I just forget about it. All right, so we have Business B. They are creating a list of onboarding steps for new customers for their app. These steps detail integrations with their CRM, which is like a customer management product, emails to the user, and analytics. The business is worried about the time it will take to build all of this from scratch. Is there an AWS service that can help? Okay. Answer. This is where that step functions can come in. Let's go back up. So step functions. They have so let's talk about the scenario. So they have a list of onboarding steps for customers in their new app. So I'm just for this scenario, we think about the app, there's 4 steps. And you've got to do this step, and then it prompts you to do the next step, and then it prompts you to do the next step. The steps detail integrations within their CRM, emails to the user, analytics. They've got all these services they need to tie together. That's what step functions is for. So we stitch together different Amazon services. We can have complex workflows, we can have error handling, and it just allows us to transition between different states. So the AWS step functions is what would allow this to happen and give us that integration between all of those services, and we could walk through them kind of in a flowchart way. All right, business C. They are an e-commerce company building a custom platform because they hate themselves. They are adding new functionality, yeesh, and want to have aspects of the platform that listen for events like orders and refunds. They don't know yet, of course they don't, all of the elements that would need to respond to events. So, is there a service that would allow current and future parts of the platform to listen for these events? And that's that simple notification service. So the simple notification service, we go back up, was one of these that I talked about here in the AWS messaging section. So when we want to have a way to message different services, like different applications, we want to add that functionality where it kind of like listens for those messages, right? Those events, like orders or refunds, and then it triggers it to do something. That simple notification service is going to be really easy to add on to later or make changes. So since they don't know yet what all elements they need to listen for, or they might want to make changes in the future, then that's the right answer. So I'm going to commit the document. The document is now finished. If you want to check it out. No, we didn't identify resources for technology support. I guess we probably need to look at that. Wait, did I not do management and government? Wouldn't that be something? I guess maybe I didn't. Okay, it's not done. I lied! That's fine. We didn't do management and governance services. We didn't talk about things like Cloud Watch and Cloud Trail. We need to do that. Control Tower. That's the last section I need to do. Cool. Let's go back in. And technology support, although that's not a very big area. All right, let's go back down here. Because honestly, management and governance is really important. Where am I? Here. All right, management and governance services. We're gonna do AWS Cloud Trail and Amazon Cloud Watch and AWS Config. Systems Manager. Cloud Formation. See, they're so good at naming things. Isn't it ridiculous? Organizations and Control Tower. That's it. This is our last section. All right, because management and governance, all of the other stuff that we've been talking about are like services that you would use to like make applications that your users would use or things like that. But in this section, we're talking about the services that allow you to create kind of an ecosystem of management. So when we launch a resource in the cloud, like how do we keep track of it? How do we make sure that, you know, we've looked at like billing monitoring, but like how do we make sure that we are tracking like usage and track our infrastructure? And some of that is, you know, infrastructure automation, but then also things like operational insights. And then if you have multiple users who are like all on the same account, like for me, educationally, I own our AWS account, but all of the faculty have their own accounts and can go in there and create resources on our organization. So like, how do you manage multiple people that are in there doing those things? So we're gonna start with CloudTrail. Let me get the page. And depending on what you're doing, you know, if it's just you on the account, then of course you don't have an organization, you don't need a control tower, you don't need some of these things. But if you're talking about doing this like for a client or consulting, then of course you need to know how these things work. So CloudTrail is a service that enables governance, compliance, things like operational or risk auditing. So compliance, operational auditing, risk auditing, and continuous monitoring. So this gives you a really detailed event history of everything that's going on your AWS account. So if you want to see, you know, who's accessing things through the management console, through SDKs, through command line tools, gives you a simplified history. You get a history of everything that happens on your account. How services and resources are accessed. Simplifies security analysis, resource charge tracking. I actually had to use this today. So in the summer, like all of our resources are spun down. Like I have very little things that we're using except for some databases that manage applications that we use continuously. And so I have very little AWS usage or spend. And of course it's the beginning of the month. So I got our bill for May and I was like, oh damn, like someone has a bunch of resources still open. And so I go into CloudTrail and I pull our billing report. The charge tracking section, every faculty member has to tag their resources. So I knew exactly who still has those resources open by the tags. And so I contacted that person and helped them get their resources shut down so that we're not continuing to pay for things that aren't being used. And so I had to use this today, and it's a great way to keep track of what's going on your account. So yeah, that's one of the, you know, the primary uses with CloudTrail. Is to keep track and basically creates an audit trail, and it stores everything like most services in an S3 bucket. You can also create CloudWatch logs. The logs, so let's talk about logging. So creates S3 bucket. Or CloudWatch log. Logs events in the regions in which they occur. If your business requires like infrastructure auditing for compliance, then this will meet that requirement. For many compliance requirements, I guess we could say meets many. Can't always say it'll meet all, but best practice, it should be enabled on every AWS account. If you go in there and create your own personal profile for, you know, practice and study, then yeah, go enable CloudTrail and get used to reading the logs and seeing what they say. You can consolidate it into an organizational trail if you have an AWS organization, which I have, and that's how I can see what's going on everyone's account. So CloudWatch, I mentioned the CloudWatch log. Let's talk about CloudWatch. Let me pull up that page. So CloudWatch is a monitoring and observability service. So really built for, you know, your DevOps engineers, developers, people doing site reliability, IT managers, but it provides data and actionable insights to monitor your applications. So you can respond to things like system-wide performance changes, you can optimize resource utilization, you can get a unified view of your operational health. So it collects monitoring and operational data in the form of logs, metrics, and events. So that's really what's going on with CloudTrail. You know, sometimes I'm going to say many uses here. Compliance requirements, forensic analysis, operational analysis, and troubleshooting. And I've had to use this quite a bit just to keep track of some of our organizational usage. You know, we've had some apps that were kind of high volume for short periods of time to support particular student events. And so we've got hundreds of students all on the app at a time trying to do things. And so you can use CloudWatch to track your services and make sure everything's up and scaling appropriately and you don't have any bottlenecks. I also had a situation a couple of years ago. We had a student who was writing an application and he had API access to our Amazon account. And he checked in his code to a public GitHub repo. And there are bots that troll through GitHub repos looking for things like API keys, and he checked our API key in. And then they steal your API key and they go create whatever they want and chew up a bunch of your resources and basically steal from you because you're having to pay for those resources, but they get to use them. And so I had to, first off, like I immediately had a billing alert because they spun up all of this storage and servers and started, I mean, I think they were Bitcoin mining, but a lot of times people use it for much more illegal and nefarious purposes. But then, you know, got the billing alerts almost immediately when it started, so I knew something was going on. But then using CloudWatch to try to determine what were they doing, what resources had they brought up, and looking at all of the different availability zones because they had used multiple availability zones to create different things. So there's lots of different things that you can watch for to make sure that you're not you know, overutilizing or, you know, for optimization. And of course that I spelled forensic wrong. Analysis. And then AWS config, let me get the page. All of these kind of work hand in hand. So config is a service that enables you to assess and audit and evaluate the configurations of your resources. So config monitors your and records your AWS resource configurations, and then allows you to automate the evaluation of those recorded configurations against your desired configuration. So this really allows you to simplify things like compliance auditing or security analysis, change management, operational troubleshooting. You know, if you've got a EC2 server instance out there misconfigured, then AWS config is going to be able to quickly diagnose that for you. So these three pieces here, CloudWatch, config, and then System Manager that we're going to talk about next, are really the big pieces of that managing infrastructure bubble. So let's talk about Systems Manager. Oh, did I have anything else on CloudWatch? I said, oh yeah, enable alarms. Even if you have a personal account, enable billing alarms and enable CloudWatch alarms, because if your account is compromised, you will know almost immediately through email or text, however you want to set that up. But that is highly useful. And then yeah, custom dashboards are also a good one to note based on collected metrics. And I can show you what this looks like. So let's go in and look at So here you can see right now, here's my CloudWatch kind of dashboard that I have set up. I don't have, like I said, I don't have a lot of resources up right now, so that's okay. But I have a billing alarm, and I know because, again, I had that conversation with the faculty member who hadn't shut down their resources. So I got this billing alarm and knew immediately something was wrong. But you can also, you know, come in here and do some things with your metrics. I don't have anything to show, I don't think. You can look at EC2 for instance metrics. Yeah, there's nothing to see here. And look at this by database. So like here is a database that I manage, that it's in RDS. It's a Microsoft SQL Server. And here is the CPU utilization over time. I could also look at things like read latency or disk queue. You know, if this server is really being, you know, pounded on or something, then, you know, I could go check that out and make sure that, you know, everything looks good, or go manage the server. The Mario Maker database, right? Yeah, and I can come in here and see, you know, like when are most students accessing the database? You know, which is typically the few hours prior to the due date. It's awful to say. But make sure that, you know, the server is prepared with the appropriate resources to support the additional load if everyone's on there at the same time. So yeah, you can come in here and configure your dashboards. You can have different types of dashboards. Here was one I set up. We had two Lambda functions that I was monitoring for an event that these functions were being accessed through an app. And we wanted to know like how many people were using it and then how many records were we writing. And so this was just a a particular dashboard set up, and you can come back and set up time periods for how you want to see this data, but it will give you kind of that overview. All right, so System Manager. Yeah. Oh, was there anything else I had on config? Nope, that's not it. There we go. You know, and it's funny that you say that about the Mario Maker data, because I really think it has to do with whether or not you were at least familiar with Mario Maker, because for some people, understanding the concepts of, all right, we have a player, they can make a course, they can play a course, they can have a record in a course. What is a clear? What is a like? It was very confusing for people that just did not have that context at all. But if you'd played Mario Maker before, then yeah, I think it was a lot more fun than, you know, what you get a lot of times in like sample databases is like, it's a fake business and we have invoices and we have customers and we have purchases and it's boring. Mario Maker is much more fun. All right, the Systems Manager gives you visibility and control of your infrastructure on AWS. So you get a unified user interface. So you can view operational data from multiple services and automate operational tasks. And I don't think I have anything set up in mine, because I don't automate things. But it really just kind of gives you the tools that make it easier to manage your AWS infrastructure if you have a lot of things, right? So you maybe do want to automate tasks for common maintenance actions, or you can also give a secure way to access servers using only AWS credentials. So a little bit of security there. And then if you have, let's see, gives you a way to store commonly used parameters securely for operational use. So again, these three pieces, CloudWatch, Config, System Manager, together they really give you all of the tools that you need to make sure that you are managing your infrastructure. You have reports, you have logging, you can trace things down for troubleshooting or security. If your business needs to, you know, keep track of these things for compliance purposes, then you have all of that information. All right, Cloud Formation. Again, another great name. All right, so Cloud Formation provides a common language for you to model and provision both AWS and third-party application resources in your cloud environment. So it's kind of like a programming language. You can also use actual programming languages or a text file, and then in an automated and secure way, provision resources. And here's where, again, my story about the scammer people who grabbed the API key from the poor student. If you are setting up an environment in AWS and you have, all of your infrastructure, I need this many servers, I need this database, I need this kind of storage, I need these things connected, I need this virtual private cloud so they all talk together. This is basically a script file that you upload and AWS does the work. And here comes all these resources in the model that you've configured, and they all work together, and here it is. And so let's say I do go steal someone's API key off of GitHub. I can then connect to their account, load up a CloudFormation file. I have all the resources I need, and I'm done. Right? Great. Super. That's against the law. Don't break the law. But it's almost like a single source of truth for your AWS and third-party resources in a configurable file. So very, very handy for provisioning infrastructure based on templates. There's no additional charge for CloudFormation. You only just pay for whatever you are uploading and or whatever your services you're actually creating. It doesn't cost anything extra to use CloudFormation. Templates can be in YAML or JSON. So basically like your object structure languages. So this is really like infrastructure as code. And you can manage dependencies between resources and have drift detection to find changes in your infrastructure. So you can actually take a file, a CloudFormation file, and then upload it and say, does what I have right now match what's in this file? Or have I added and changed things? And then you can update your CloudFormation file to match, or it'll tell you where the differences are. So you can actually see if almost like a scope creep for your infrastructure if things have changed. So it's actually a really handy feature to go check, hey, do I have this many S3 buckets and are they named this and do they have these features? Pretty cool stuff. All right, so let's talk about organizations. And again, if you don't have multiple people that need access to an account, then of course you're not going to have an organization. But if you are doing this for a business as a consultant or as your job, then of course you want to understand how this works. So an organization helps you centrally govern. Your environment as you grow and scale your workloads. So this gives you centralized billing, control access, compliance checking, monitoring, and security. So, of course, you're sharing resources across your AWS accounts. So, for example, let's say I create an EC2 server, I get it all configured, I install everything it needs. I can then hand it off, because we're in the same AWS organization, to one of my faculty members who is actually going to use it. So I can create that server, get it all set up, get it all configured, share it, and now I don't have to worry about it. He has it, he can do what he needs with it. If something should happen, let's say he doesn't work for us anymore, I can control access to that, I can shut it down, I can take it back, whatever I need to do. There's no charge for using organizations. It's just a tool to then allow you to go in and manage multiple accounts under a single master account. And then consolidated billing is probably one of the biggest features, so that you can But then you can also have that centralized logging and security standards across all of your accounts. And then Control Tower, let me get the page. So if you're in an organization with multiple AWS accounts and maybe even teams, because you can kind of create like organizational units and have people broken up into teams in your cloud setup, then once things start getting large, then that governance can be complex and time consuming. And the Control Tower provides the easiest way to then set up and govern your new environments. So there's a lot of benefits to this. You know, you can automate the setup of your multi-account AWS environment, provides, you know, mandatory and strongly recommended high-level rules. They call them guardrails that help enforce policies, provides you with integrated dashboards. So let me see, let's write some stuff down. Provides setup and governance support for large accounts, orgs, and teams. You can automate the setup of your AWS environment. Provides the recommended rules called guardrails that help enforce policy. You can also detect policy violations using AWS config rules. What else? You still get all of the same things that you get with your organization, you know, so you centralize your users, but it really just provides a way to create new accounts based on templates. And then, oh yeah, the dashboard includes a dashboard to gain operational insights from a single view. So, good stuff. So now we're ready to do scenarios on this section. This was our management and governance section. All right. So we have business A. They are a financial services company that recently discovered that someone had disabled a security setting on a server. Yeesh. They are concerned, rightly so, that events like this might go unnoticed until a breach. Or maybe they've already had a breach and they just don't even know, because if they hadn't discovered that someone disabled a security setting, like give the intern too much power. So which service would allow the organization to continually track configuration and infrastructure? If someone has the power to disable a security setting on a server, what other permissions do they have that might not be appropriate? Or how would you know when someone has done such a thing? And that is the AWS config service that we talked about that allows you to monitor the configurations of your infrastructure so that you know if someone has done something shady. Let's talk about business B. They are a leading software as a service company that will be launching a new application that includes several components. They are looking at ways to minimize manual work required when creating infrastructure. So what service would enable them to automate their effort? So the service that we talked about for automation was Cloud Formation. So Cloud Formation is that service that allows you to create programmatically a file that you load up and it will create infrastructure resources for you. And then business C, they are a manufacturing company and they have a cloud server which is needed to support their business processes, and it was deleted. Which sometimes happens in your cloud environment if you're not careful with your menus or who you're giving access to, or maybe just like a rogue incident. But a cloud server, which was needed to support their business, was deleted. They want to make sure they know who did it. They want to make sure they know who was responsible. So, which service could show the individual who deleted this specific server? So AWS Cloud Trail is the service that's going to give the detailed logging, remember, of every action that takes place on your account or in your organization for multiple accounts. And that this is going to give you, the exact detail of who was logged in and who did the action. Someone who found out the password was password 1. Yeah. So, and then that's almost like a good point, right? So making sure that your users are setting strong passwords or that they're using two-factor authentication is part of the services that we've talked about. So, I need to fix these bullet points. These ones are weird. But that control tower can set up those guardrails to make sure that your users are all doing what they're supposed to be doing and that no one is doing anything shady or that could put your business at risk. And then having those policies in place means that no one can mess stuff up. Let me fix these bullet points I saw. Let's pull these in. Some semblance of organization in this document. So that should be all of the services. Oh, come on, don't be a jerk. Tab all this in. There we go. Yeah, so that should be all of this section except for the resources for technology support, which honestly isn't a big deal. Like, AWS support is support. Like, it's not like there's a bunch of different things to identify. So I might just throw a link in here, but this goes through all of the, you know, we talked about global infrastructure, we talked about core services, methods of deploying and operating in the cloud. So that's domain 3. Let's go back to our document and kind of look at where we're at right now. In the main one here, you know, I've got some links to some resources and courses and stuff like that. So, you know, domain 1, we talked about cloud concepts, cloud economics, design principles, types of cloud computing, all of these things. We had our scenarios, and then we skipped security and compliance because, again, I talked about it doesn't really make sense. Like, we talked about the shared responsibility model and like regions and availability zones, but it didn't make sense to really get into some security concepts before we talked about the different types of services. Because if you're not familiar with the services, then how does keeping, like, the concepts about how to keep them secure just doesn't make sense. Now, the access management capabilities, we talked about a little bit in the other section. So I may just link to the other document for that content, but I think all I have left to cover is the security and compliance concepts, because we covered domain 3. This is the document we just finished. And then billing and pricing. We didn't really talk much about billing and pricing, so I guess I've got some stuff I need to put in here. We've talked about it a little bit as we went along and looked at the various pricing for the services. We talked a little bit about billing monitoring, so I just need to clean this document up. But that's where we are with things. You know, we're getting very close to the end of having covered all of the resources and items necessary for the Cloud Practitioner Exam. Again, you know, the purpose here is to kind of talk about all of the, you know, what's on the exam. What do you need to learn or understand to prepare to take that exam? There's kind of the, you know, there's a whole path of information. Really, the specific content that I'm covering is really just, you know, I don't have any, if you don't have any experience with AWS and these services or how it works, like, nothing is going to substitute coming in here to the dashboard, like creating your own account, playing with some of these services, like create an S3 bucket, make a website like we started with today, go spin up an EC2 server, check it out, log into it, how does it work? If you stay in the free tier with your usage, you honestly aren't going to spend any money. You might rack up a couple of dollars in Lambda charges if you go load up a Lambda service or something, but at best it's going to be like $10. So, you know, you really can't make too many large mistakes and end up spending a lot of money. It's really doesn't work like that unless you're doing something weird where you bring up a gigantic instance with a bunch of storage and stuff. Just try to keep it small. And the free tier guardrails that are in there when you're setting up servers and things, you know, tries to give you some guidance on what you need to do or how, you know, what resources do you need to look at. So I think that probably wraps it up for me. I do try to keep these, you know, no more than a couple of hours, just because I think attention span wise, that's probably wise. But then like I get tired of talking. So there we are. But I appreciate you. If you came out, hung out with me today and talked about all of the things that we've been talking about. We've now covered all of the core AWS services, what they do, how they work. We've got our concept questions to really like think about those scenarios, because those are the kinds of questions that you see on the exam, or these kinds of scenarios. You know, what service would you recommend? Once I get done with the document, which I don't think I have more than maybe one more session to get these little things lined out, I do want to run through a practice exam live so you can see what those questions look like. I have some practice exams that I can access. So I think I'll do that before I start moving on to the next section that I want to do, which is going to be a more professional certification. And we'll really be digging into using some of these services and how they work and things like that. So yeah, hey, thanks for coming out. And hopefully if I don't get to this tomorrow, because I have a very high likelihood that I can probably stream some of this tomorrow, then it'll be next week. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your weekend if I don't see you. Thanks for hanging out. And yeah, take it easy.